Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, in the news this week, we're going to talk about Turkey's latest offensive in Syria. That's the latest in many moves in the country of Syria. Also, we're going to look at Russia now considering replacing the U.S. dollar in some of their energy transfers, which we know they've talked a lot about this in the past, but now actually making moves to do so. We also have a series of meetings that Pope Francis has had over the years and what's come about with those. And also a interesting video on some of the NATO requirements and how NATO was formed. But first, there's a growing controversy in the public school system now being called lunch shaming. Now, school districts are attempting to hold parents accountable. One school district in New Jersey decided to restrict students who owed more than $10 to receiving a tuna fish sandwich. If they owed over $20, they would get no lunch at all. Now, the policy is an attempt to collect $14,000 in unpaid lunches, but parents are not pleased the way the school is handling it.
Well, through a meeting with the school district, they are trying to reach a compromise. Those who owe would still get a hot lunch, but will have to forfeit some extracurricular activities like prom, at least until the debts are paid. One school board member said, "I think this strikes a balance of compassion and at the same time making sure we're holding people accountable."
Well, you might think this is an isolated incident, but what's shocking is that 75% of school districts nationwide report having student meal debt. Now, this number has increased 70% in just the last 6 years.
Wow. Well, Russia is considering replacement for the U.S. dollar in its energy transactions. This would help reduce risk to the Russian economy. Economy Minister Max Oreshkin has said Moscow can accept payments in euros as well as the Russian ruble when it comes to energy exports. He also made the statement that the local currency is stable enough to be used as a global currency.
Well, since 2014, President Vladimir Putin has made de-dollarization a priority for his country. Now, back then, the U.S. began imposing sanctions on Russia for several reasons, including the situation in Ukraine. Now, while the use of other currencies does help Russia get around U.S. sanctions, it also looked at an attempt to weaken the dollar as a global currency.
But Russia is not the only one dissatisfied with the U.S. dollar being used as a sanctions weapon. University professor and author Daniel Kovalek told RT in an interview, "I think by last count, I saw the U.S. is now sanctioning 35 different countries in the world. It threatens to sanction other countries as well. I think, as you say, even U.S. allies are tired of being bullied, tired of being held hostage by the U.S. and by the U.S. dollar. And it's so inevitable that they're going to look for other alternatives."
Now, he went on to say how others who have tried to use a new standard for their currency were actually overthrown, like the example of Muammar Gaddafi. Now, Gaddafi wanted to create a gold-based currency for Africa. While this is exactly what the U.S. is afraid of, they have actually created the situation by using the dollar as a weapon against other countries, pressuring them actually to find alternative means to save their economies and actually come out from that bully-like attitude of, you got to use the U.S. dollar.
Right, yeah, you could kind of see the pressure that other countries are under because they look at, if I don't use the U.S. dollar, then we're kind of cut off from the rest of the buying world. So it kind of becomes a frustrating thing to them when they're threatened with sanctions and they really kind of have no other alternatives because other countries won't deal with them as well because of fears of sanctioning from the United States. Well, Located in the Persian Gulf in the southwestern province of Fars, Iran has just discovered a new natural gas reserve worth $40 billion, with the capacity to produce nearly 400 million barrels of gas condensate. Iran and Qatar will share this large natural gas deposit, which will put Qatar as the world's largest liquid natural gas exporter, while Iran plans to use its share mostly for domestic use because of U.S. sanctions.
Iran's natural gas reserve is the second largest in the world, but due to decades of international sanctions, has not yet become a natural gas exporter. Now, Iran's natural gas reserves are about 18% of the world's total reserves, ranking second, which only behind Russia, in terms of the biggest proven gas reserves in the world. However, in terms of natural gas producing countries, Iran ranks fourth because of, surprisingly, a lack of technology.
And I'm sure those sanctions haven't helped Iran with that either.
Not at all.
Refineries are needed in order to be able to export the natural gas. So despite the large proven natural gas reserve, technology is needed if Iran plans to export their product. This, along with heavy sanctions, is resulting in billions of missed currency being pumped into Iran's economy.
Well, Iran is not the only country being hurt by sanctions. China's Natural Petroleum Corporation just announced that they're pulling out of a $5 billion natural gas project located in that same area as this new natural gas deposit was found. Now, Iran was counting on China to oversee the project, which would have brought them much needed relief to their failing economy. Now, this project was originally a partnership with France, who also pulled out under U.S. pressure, despite having invested about $100 million into the project. Now, that might not be a whole lot for these countries dealing in the gas and oil, but still $5 billion for China, $100 million for France, just to pull out because of U.S. pressure. That says something about how much the pressure that the United States can put on another country.
Yeah, and as a result, it's not just the leaders of those countries that are being sanctioned that are suffering, it's the entire population of the country that suffers as a result. And what are the people to do to make sure that their needs are taken care of? Puts everyone in a bind. Well, as a side note, China decided to pull out of the Iran deal only after the U.S. and China sealed a partial deal on trade. Now, so the U.S., again, Jeff, it's created a huge blow to Iran's economy. Like we just mentioned, other countries are not wanting to deal with them as a result. Even though they discovered this huge gas field, they will have to develop it without foreign investment. And that's going to be kind of hard to do because they don't have the resources to invest in infrastructure.
Right. Well, our field correspondent, Larry McGee, has been doing some more research on these U.S. sanctions. And this time, the U.S. sanctions are usually designed to hurt the economy, but this latest round, or one of the latest rounds, is actually targeting food and medical supplies, which, as you mentioned, that is directly affecting the people there. So Larry McGee has the latest on this story as well as others. Larry, what has been Iran's response to this type of sanction?
In our most humane state, and when we are most willing to be objective, dispassionate, and civil, there is a common belief in our global society, at least among moral and mature citizens, that all human life, regardless of ethnicity, nationality, culture, or gender, is valuable. It is on the premise that this belief is being violated that Iran's current president, Hassan Rouhani, is saying that the latest sanctions imposed by the U.S. represent a crime against humanity. The restrictions affect Iran's ability to secure food and medical supplies and are a product, according to President Rouhani, of America capitulating to pressure from Israel, Saudi Arabia, and extremists from inside the U.S. itself. Mr. Rouhani says Iran will not forget this crime. It is hard for economists to forget the economic warfare that has been raging between the U.S. and its many targets over the last several years, and the concerns regarding it are prompting warnings now from the IMF. The infamous Monetary Fund is announcing that trade wars will cut global growth to its lowest since the financial crisis a decade ago, and that the world and all of its suffering, impoverished and needy inhabitants are poised to lose $700 billion by this coming year because of it. The way forward in overcoming the conflicts and difficulties among the nations include several things, but high on the list are definitely communication and cooperation. While it doesn't enjoy a reputation for independence and is thought to be more of a pawn and a tool for powerful behind-the-scenes entities, NATO is, if nothing else, at least a show of Western cooperation. Here's a look at the organization and its requirements.
In 1949, at the founding of the North Atlantic Alliance, there were 12 original signatories. However, the founding treaty allowed for new members to be invited to join NATO with the unanimous agreement of all existing allies. Since 1949, the alliance has taken in 17 new members, with the latest addition of Montenegro. Before a country can be invited to join NATO, it has to satisfy certain prerequisites to be eligible for membership. The country must be geographically within Europe, it must be a democracy, and there must be the capacity and willingness to contribute to the security of the Euro-Atlantic area. With these prerequisites met, the country can be invited to join the Membership Action Plan, or MAP for short. This plan provides tailored advice and support on different aspects of membership, ranging from defense and military to political and legal issues. Participation in the MAP does not prejudge any decision by the alliance on future membership. Moreover, as no two countries are quite the same, each MAP process varies in progression and length. After delivering the necessary reforms, accession talks are held. Over the course of these talks, the invitee country accepts the commitments, rights, and obligations of NATO membership. The next step requires every member of the alliance to sign and ratify the accession protocol. While the ratification process is ongoing, the invitee country will also be integrated into certain aspects of NATO's work. In the final step of the process, the invitee country needs to adopt and deposit its own bill of ratification to join NATO. Countries do so according to their national democratic procedures. For some countries, this procedure will include a national referendum, and for others, simply a parliamentary vote. Once this bill of ratification is officially passed, the country has successfully become a NATO member. On the 5th of June, 2017, NATO welcomed Montenegro as its 29th member.
The organization at present has among its ranks the nation of Turkey, who is under strong international pressure after launching an ill-regarded offensive against the Kurdish population in northern Syria. President Trump has said that the move jeopardized civilian lives, and Secretary of Defense Mike Esper is said to be headed to Brussels this week on the president's behalf to push a unified diplomatic and economic response from NATO on the matter. The member states of the organization are divided on the issue at present. The British have not opposed Turkey on the matter, but the Dutch and Germans have gone on record as being unsupportive and discontinuing any further arms sales to Ankara. Analysts say, however, that over the years, Turkey has already been supplied with the necessary weapons to carry out its intentions, and so it is therefore easier now for Western powers to back off, play good cop, and refuse to sell any additional arms, when in reality, the Turkish army has already been well supplied. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Eventually with these sanctions, I think we're going to see a straw that eventually breaks the camel's back with these nations, and they're going to do something to ensure their safety and their country's survival as the U.S. continues to put this economic pressure on them. Well, if you remember, in 2013, Pope Francis met with the Patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomew I. The main leader of the Orthodox Church said that he hopes that he can meet the Pope in Jerusalem later that year. About 1,000 years ago, though, the two churches excommunicated one another, but eventually the reconciliation process began and continues to this day. The leader of the Orthodox Church gave the Pope a small icon, and the Pope gave him a cross.
Well, then again, in 2016, the Pope received a delegation of the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, led by the Metropolitan Methodist of Boston. Now, his first visits to the Vatican served to celebrate the feast of Saints Peter and Paul, of who it is said are patrons of the Church of Rome. Now, the Pope spoke about Peter and Paul, and after the presentation, the Methodist gave the Pope a letter from Constantinople before they exchanged gifts.
There, the Pope received a medallion of Saints Andrew and Peter embracing as a symbol of unity between the two churches. Well, the Pope returned the gesture with a medallion of Saint Martin of Tours and an explanation of its meaning.
Well, in 2018, the Pope met with the Turkish President Erdogan in Rome. Now, building bridges between religions and cultures were some of the main topics. Now, they haven't met since, but the two leaders shared humanitarian concerns such as the plight of refugees. Erdogan has given shelter to over 3 million refugees and has shown support for them for years. Now, the two leaders' common concern is Jerusalem.
Now, the Bishop of Istanbul said of Erdogan and the Pope that they're talking on the issue of Jerusalem, saying that they're talking as one voice and working to develop peace. The Hagia Sophia Museum used to be a church and mosque used by both faiths. But in Jerusalem, there is no such understanding between the two religions. This is another thing the President of Turkey and the Pope will be working together to resolve.
And if you remember last year, the Pope used his last Christmas message to call for a two-state solution. Now, last year, when the Pope met with the leader of the Orthodox Church, Bartholomew, the Pope accompanied him to the celebration of the patron of the Orthodox Church. Now, sometime later, from the Central African Republic, the Pope sent the Patriarch congratulations, asking the Lord to bless the sister churches.
The Turkish assault on Syria has lasted for 7 days, despite a call from U.S. President Trump threatening to impose sanctions on Turkey. 3 ministers in Turkey were sanctioned, and recently Vice President Pence said that the president has made it clear that the U.S. will take actions against Turkey's economy until they bring the violence to an end. International pressure is also building up on Turkey as France, Germany, Sweden, and Finland all have refused to sell arms to Turkey, who is still a NATO member. Even Iran and China are urging Turkey to halt its offensive.
Well, Assad forces are said to be deploying forces to the northern Syrian border as an added defense against the Kurdish forces. Now, as Syrian troops climbed the hilltops waving Syrian flags, in the distance, U.S. troops could be seen leaving the area. Now, direct clashes between Syria and Turkey seem to be on the horizon as the situation continues to get worse rapidly.
Well, lastly, back to Rome, as we once again remind you of the last meeting between the Pope and the Patriarch of Constantinople. Bartholomew traveled to Rome to thank the Pope for the gift that was given to him, which were fragments of bones of the first Pope, St. Peter. Now, the Pope did this as a gesture of unity between the two churches, and the Patriarch gave the Pope a chalice and 2 coffee mugs, while the Pope gave Bartholomew the document that he actually signed between him and the Muslims, or the Catholic Church and the Muslims, and his main magisterial document. Patriarch, of course, saw the bone fragments as a concrete gesture towards unity between the two churches. So we can see that Rome is trying to strengthen its ties with really, I guess, another one of the, in terms of billions of people, the Muslim religion has over 1 billion people, just like the Roman Catholic religion at some point had over 1 billion people. I think their numbers are continually dropping. So they're trying to build bridges so that they can be on the same page. At the same time, we see amongst the nations, which we know religion has a lot to do in the decisions that a lot of the nations make, you know, it seems like they're tearing those bridges down. You know, the U.S. is putting sanctions on everybody. Countries are getting fed up. Russia says, hey, let's find another way to build our economy and to do trade. Let's push the dollar out of the way so we can do what we need to do, not fear being hurt by sanctions. And so we see countries making moves to secure their stability outside of U.S. influence.
Right, it certainly seems like it's everybody for themselves. And, you know, even if there is an agreement between nations, the trust is what's lacking because the nations are not putting that trust in one another as if, is this person really watching out for my own best interest, or are they trying to get something over on me? So, as you said, You know, the moves look like they might be trying to build bridges, but really there's a lot of tearing down and creating walls that are in place that have caused the nations to really distrust and build a lot of hatred for one another.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Sadly, it is right now. Sadly, that's the way it is. Well, if you'd like to know more about what you can do to actually build bridges to peace, contact the House of Yahweh. And when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and the monthly newsletter. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites by going to yahweh.com, yisraelhawkins.com, or yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to ypnnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you can do so by emailing info@yahweh.com. For any international calls, you can call the number that's on your screen now. And if you haven't already checked out the Yisrael Says program and the Ask Yisrael program, they're absolutely free, guaranteed to answer any of your scriptural questions. Please check it out today by going to YisraelSays.com and AskYisrael.com.
Well, stay logged on, because up next is Yisrael Hawkins. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimer.
Thank you for watching.